Let's imagine we don't have this bill, we were just trying to address some of these horrendous issues we're hearing about. What would you do?
One thing I would do is I would say there has to be dedicated transitions workers. Make that mandatory.
I think training so that people understand what is expected. But I guess the bit that always seems to be missing is the accountability and what happens if people don't have transition plans. What happens?
Continuity in relationships are really important here, and they've been mentioned by others. And I would say that one way to support that is to create an all-age service. And obviously that's being considered by the National Care Service at the moment.
I think we also need an urgent review of the availability of appropriate provision. What services are available for young people when they're leaving school.
Everyone here today, and everyone who's been involved in the discussions, is looking for improved outcomes. That's what we're about. It's not about processes and legislation, it's about improved outcomes. But one of the criticisms that's been levelled at this proposed bill, rightly or wrongly, is that part of it replicates already existing duties. Do you accept that criticism, and does that cause you some concern that we just create more legislation when in actual fact what we really need is to sharpen up the legislation we have, or use this bill to do that, so we get where we want to here and actually improve the opportunities for these young people?
You're adding layer upon layer. You're looking at another piece of legislation, and there's no detail about how this bill will interact and align with the current legislation that's already there. We need to simplify, we need to clarify it for people, and we need to focus on practice and capacity and resourcing.
Anybody else want to pick up on that? Leanne?
Legislation is what I often have to rely on to get the best outcomes for my young people. I have to be able to use that legislation and to rely on it and refer to it to get what we need. I think there are gaps that particularly some of the young people that I support fall between, and they're not quite covered by one set of legislation, and they don't quite fit the bill for the other set of legislation. Whereas I believe that this bill does have the potential to be a net for those gaps.
I just wonder, from your perspective, whether a national transition strategy, providing it was based on best practice and what you know works well, would support more consistent approaches across the country and therefore better outcomes. And if it would, how do you think that could be made to work in practice?
The bill itself is fine. What it's proposing is fine. Accountability to ministers is fine, but it's not going to be enacted effectively without resources.
The NHS and other entities will always say, if you give us more money, we can fix this. Isn't there also, from what we've heard today, right across the session, some cultural and systemic problems that need to be addressed out with purely financial resource and what flows from that?
On general paediatric waiting lists or on CAMS waiting lists, it's just not the same impetus as being on a hip or knee waiting list, which is a very black and white waiting list. So we need to put children back into the centre. These are our assets. You know,
the leadership is at the heart of it. I think what is lacking is a bit of leadership. I think that's if that can be influenced, then things can shift. And
I think we also need to consider where children and young people are going to sit. We know there's a lot of change going on around the National Care Service at the moment, some other legislation that will be going alongside this, and that wider, more population level approach we'll need to consider.
Do you think that professionals are always entirely receptive to suggestions of best practice elsewhere? Because by implication it criticises what they're doing.
I think our workforce should always have a culture of continuously development, and I'm sure they would tell you that they do have a culture of continuous development and they're open to that. However, I think people are feeling strained at the moment, and more change can bring a lot of stress, even if it's for the better. and we've got a burnt out workforce. So implementing that change can be challenging if they're not on board. And that's just respecting where that service is at the moment and what our workforce has been through over the last 3 years. But yeah, our workforce should absolutely be open to fair criticism or critique. Yeah.
So I guess, not trying to put words in your mouth, but for this bill to work, it would have to be accompanied by resources, but it would also have to, however it finished up, convince the workforce it was going to make a tangible difference.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think you're not going to enact any change without that co-production, without staff believing in what they're not going to engage in it if they don't think it's going to result in better outcomes for the population or the young people they're working with. So yeah, you absolutely need the workforce on board.
Yeah.